Hello and welcome to another episode of The Wrong Kind of Black. So in this episode, I'm going to be answering the question, am I proud to be black? I thought it'd be necessary to start off by talking about what pride is. What makes people proud of the race or culture that they're from? Is it pride for characteristics that their culture or race has acquired over time? Is it acceptance for what makes them who they are despite their culture or race's shortcomings? Is it the belief that their culture or race is superior than others? Is it pride for a sense of belonging to a particular community? Pride might manifest itself in so many ways, which I thought was worth talking about. I'm going to start by addressing one question. I'm sure there must be some people who are not black who wonder whether black people ever think about this question. So, do I ever wake up and wish to be white? So the answer is no. There is an explanation for that. So when we're born, if you think about it, we're indoctrinated as soon as we're conceived. We're given a name, and the name is representative of the culture that we're from. We are spoken to in a particular language. The languages that we speak might be derived from a particular religion or culture, and a lot of the Abrahamic religions in particular, as well as others, make up the language and culture that we're exposed to. Just for example, saying bless you and Jesus and hearing that kind of stuff around you makes you acclimatized to the particular culture that you're going to be subjected to and more likely to follow and be proud of. Why is it that Muslims are always born Muslim, or the majority of them are? Why is it that Jews are born into Jewish families? And you can say the same about Christians. So a lot of it is the environment that we're exposed to, and generally speaking, the environment tends to make us feel that the community, culture or race that we're born into is superior or has superior characteristics, which makes it the best, if not a better community or race or culture to be part of. So growing up, I always felt proud to be black, notwithstanding the fact that I was born in the UK, where the country is predominated by people who were not like me. I liked particular aspects of our culture that made me who I was, and it made me feel exotic and unique and different. When you think of the identity politics and the stereotypes surrounding each culture and race, that didn't seem to manifest until I was a teenager, and I obviously obtained more awareness of my surroundings and the cultural politics in school and in other institutions, as well as just in general British culture. But it's pretty diverse, the area that I was raised in. Anyone who's been to Manchester in the UK knows how diverse and pluralistic the society is. So I never really felt estranged or marginalised for being black, since there were diasporas of my community dotted around Manchester. Let's start by addressing some stereotypes of the black culture. So a common one that you might probably hear is the idea that black people like to eat watermelon. It's funny because I didn't hear about this stereotype until I started traveling, because it's not really attributable to the black community in the UK. But when I first heard about the stereotype, it made me laugh because it just seemed ridiculous. And in the UK, you won't find black people eating watermelons. It's just not something that you'll find here. When I did do some research to find out why we had this stereotype, I found that apparently former slaves grew watermelons on their own land as a cash crop to sell. This is after the slaves were emancipated after the American Civil War. So that's where it stems from, and apparently there was a lot of animosity and vitriol thrown towards a black community because white Americans didn't like the idea that black people had independence and their own cash crops to sell. Black people have also been associated with fried chicken, because apparently chickens were the only animal that slaves were allowed to raise on their own during antebellum America. Grape soda and Kool-Aid were apparently inexpensive to make, which is why it became so popular in the black culture, being the poorest class in America for at least a century post-American Civil War. And I've heard the stereotype that black people are lazy, which always surprised me, because whenever I thought of people who are prominent athletics, I've always thought of black people, Africans, as being the fastest runners, being the longest runners. So that always confused me. But I think that one stems from black people's attitude, maybe in the corporate world. So that takes me seamlessly onto things that I am proud of. So I'm going to talk about things that I'm proud of about the black community. And then I'm going to talk about things that I'm not proud of. And there might be reasons why we have such negative stereotypes, which is our responsibility to eradicate. So the first thing that I'm proud of is athleticism. I think it's not news to anyone that black people have excelled in sports and athletics. You don't need to follow basketball to know who Michael Jordan is. There's LeBron James and Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal. In soccer or football, there's Ronaldinho, Ronaldo Nazario, Pele, Drogba, Thierry Henry. In 100-meter race, there's Usain Bolt, who has the fastest time ever. Black people evidently prosper when it comes to sport, and we've brought some of the biggest names in the West and even in soccer now. So I'm a huge football fan. There's more and more players coming from Africa who have unreal athletic abilities. I feel as though we're going to see more of them in our top European football leagues over the years. I'm also proud of black people's influence on music. So the biggest name being Michael Jackson, although it is contestable whether Michael Jackson is black or white. He was born into an African American family. I mean, the influence that he's had on music alone is just unparalleled, and it's something that makes me proud to be black. To be able to claim the most entertaining music artist of all time is something that makes you proud of your culture. Black people also created and influenced hip-hop, R&B, soul, blues, jazz in more contemporary times, Afrobeats, grime in the UK, even Amapiano is coming up, which is South African music. Black people, since the American Civil Rights Movement, have influenced the Western pop music culture tremendously. This isn't spoken about enough either, but we also have great comedians. The top one being probably Dave Chappelle. I know a lot of white people in the West who love Dave Chappelle's comedy. There's other big names from comedy like Richard Pryor from the movie See No Evil, Hear No Evil. If you've not seen that, you should watch it. It's hilarious. Other huge names like Eddie Murphy, Kevin Hart, Cat Williams, even Jamie Foxx, who is super talented. He's a singer, a comedian, an actor. We've got Steve Harvey, Chris Tucker, and probably my own favourite, which is Marlon Wayans from the Wayans family. But there's a few really funny comedians from that family as well. And I do know that comedy is subjective, but it is enjoyed intersubjectively in the West, and there's a lot of white people that I know who appreciate the black sense of humour and black comedy. So there's certain aspects of our culture that make black culture stand out as well. I mean, we're known for having really good seasoned food. Again, it stems from soul food, which came into popularity after the slaves were emancipated. Black people in America, they've created this culture of barbecues with really good food, albeit the food being somewhat unhealthy. But I guess a lot of the food in America is unhealthy. But again, a great culture, a great community, a great kind of environment to raise your children in, growing up eating delicious food and being together, I guess. In the UK, I think it's too cold to have barbecues as frequently as they do in America. So you'll see more house parties with really good food, really good music. Black people are known to have good rhythm as well, so that makes our parties better to a degree. Typically, black people have a great sense of humor, which is why we have so many great comedians. And the way that black people interact with each other, there's a lot of banter. People can see us as somewhat animated when we interact with each other, which might be perceived as intimidating, but within the black culture, people understand each other better, and that makes the banter even better, in my opinion, and it makes people feel a bit more comfortable around one another when they know that they can make fun of each other. So just like any other culture around the world or any other race, there's lots of things that black people can be proud of. So as I mentioned earlier about most of us, if not all of us, being indoctrinated somewhat since we're a child, it's very normal for black people to feel proud of who they are and the cultural characteristics and idiosyncrasies that make us who we are and how we identify. I think the thing that I'm personally most proud of is black people's cultural resilience. To be deemed as the most inferior race in the world due to having been subjected to centuries of slavery, and to still go on strong and to still have a sense of pride and to still be able to identify proudly about who you are and where you've come from is the thing that I'm most proud of. I don't think that many other cultures can resonate with that. I do know that other cultures and races have been subjected to terrible, abject situations and circumstances, but it is the black community that is renowned to be the worst treated. There's obviously some recency bias there because this human transatlantic slave trade was the most recent cataclysmic era in the Western world, but it is what it is, and black people have to accept the fate that we've been subjected to today. There is probably a lot of other things that black people might be proud of, but that does heavily depend on where in the world that you've grown up, the relationship that you have with your family and the people around you who identify as being part of the black community. But I will say this, the black culture in the UK, particularly Africans and Jamaicans, is very different to the black culture in America, who can't trace their ancestors back in their homeland as easily as people can do in the UK. Obviously, Jamaicans originally derived from Africa, but they've been there so long that they've created their own completely unique culture of their own. And as I mentioned in the first episode, I am 25% Jamaican. I've not had the opportunity to travel there yet, but growing up, people tended to be more proud of being from the Caribbean than they were of Africa, because Jamaicans had been there a bit longer and they'd already created their own culture within the UK, which made people more proud. They influenced music and culture and food a lot quicker than other black cultures and races in the UK did. So let's move on swiftly to things that I'm not proud of that is attributable to the black culture. Obviously, there's going to be lots of reasons as to why these negative stereotypes have been attached to the black culture, but these are things that are connected to it and things that need to improve, so I thought it was worth addressing. The first one, probably a bit personal to me, is the level of homophobia that exists in the black community. Why is this something that I'm not proud of? Well, it's as simple as this. It's widely accepted that it's a biological fact that some people are born homosexual. The fact that a lot of people haven't come round to this in the black community just beggars belief for me, because what it does is it destroys the family unit. The family unit is the very thing that we need to extricate ourselves from the fate that we've been subjected to, being that we are born only 60 years after African Americans were granted civil rights, which means that it's just going to take us longer to build wealth, to build a community that is impregnable, to build the principles and values that we need to be successful. So what are those? In my belief, those values center around family, because you build a good enough community, then you can build one that allows you to flourish financially and to take along the principles that allow you to keep your wealth. And wealth can be defined financially. It can also be defined by the principles and values that allow you to acquire more wealth. And without this, we're not going to get anywhere. So being homophobic is just going to hold these families back, because rather than embrace everybody as an equal in your family, someone with equal opportunities to find success and find happiness and to be part of a family, it's just going to perpetuate the poor mindset that perpetuates poverty. As a homosexual, it's completely understandable why people are homophobic. The reason why is because they are ignorant to a biological fact that they're not privy to. So, to give you an instance, can you imagine what it's like to be the opposite sex, right? If you're very masculine, it's very difficult to imagine just how a woman could be sexually attracted to a man and vice versa. But it doesn't mean that we deny each other's existence. It can be very hard to wrap our heads around the idea of the same sex wanting to be physically intimate with the same sex, because we're not biologically programmed to be like that. But to allow it to cause a rift in your family and to marginalize members of your own family leads to a breakdown of the family, which leads to a breakdown of the community. And without community, it's going to be very difficult to build wealth. A lot of the black men that I know are hypermasculine, which can be a good thing because it makes people more aggressive. It can make people more competitive. It can make them more protective when it comes to their family, when it comes to their relationships. But allowing that hypermasculinity to get in the way of raising a family just seems to be a bit counterintuitive and counterproductive, because family is the one thing that you should be able to count on in life, because life is very long and it can be difficult to imagine people that we raise who were completely dependent on us to then end up being the people that we rely on when we are older and are less independent. So in other words, I'm saying it takes wisdom to understand the importance of family relationships, because there's lots of peaks and troughs in life. The vagaries of life might change your course, and you need your family members to be part of it. You can depend on them financially, you can depend on them emotionally, you can depend on them to perpetuate family values, to perpetuate cultural characteristics and mannerisms. So to ostracize someone for being something that they had absolutely no say over, which is completely innocuous because there's not enough or near enough homosexuals in the world to contend with the idea that the human race will become obsolete, just makes the people being homophobic seem ridiculous and ignorant, which is essentially what they are. So it's not nice hearing stories of people becoming estranged in families just because they're homosexual. I know it's not exclusive to the black community, but the black community has obtained a certain reputation when it comes to their tolerance of homosexuality. But because it is becoming more and more prevalent, particularly in the West, it would be nice for black people or the black community itself to catch up and understand that it is completely harmless and that being homosexual doesn't change who you are and what you can contribute to society and, most importantly, the family. The next thing that I'm not particularly proud of when it comes to what the black community is associated with is crime. When I was looking at the 2023 US consensus, it showed that black people were disproportionately overrepresented when it came to violent crime. And when I looked at the 2021 consensus in the UK, it showed that black people were more than twice as likely to commit a crime than any other ethnicity in the country, bearing in mind that black people only make up 6% of the population. I was actually surprised when I looked at the data in the UK because I thought there was no way that black people could be more likely to commit a crime. Maybe it's because I live here and I know how many white people are involved in criminal organizations and violent activity. But to learn that out of a pool of 1,000 people, that black people were more than twice as likely to commit a crime was a huge surprise to me and made me realize that there's also a huge issue with the black community and crime in the UK. I feel as though there's a viral disease that's prolific in the black community, which I call victim mentality. It's a disease because it's easily spread and it's very comforting and therapeutic to blame everyone else for your problems. It's no lie that black people have been subjected to unfortunate circumstances in terms of the amount of time that the black community has had in modern society to build generations of wealth. It's no lie that black people are the ethnicity that are most likely to be discriminated against, but this is the reality. Since the American Civil Rights Movement, all black people in the West have had the same rights and the same opportunities to be successful as any other ethnicity in the culture. So what does that mean? It means that if you do find some way to acquire wealth and climb up the social hierarchy, that there's nothing that the government or others can do to bring you back down. And we can see that because there's lots of black music artists and successful sports persons that have climbed the hierarchy, right? They live coveted and privileged lifestyles, and they are not discriminated against. There are still lots of parts of the world where black people can be discriminated against, but it's not endorsed by the Western powers at all. Any forms of discrimination based on race are pretty much outdated and antiquated. So if black people focus on those parts of their lives where they are discriminated against, they'll always feel like a victim, and they'll always feel like there's no way that they can climb out of the hole that they feel that they are in. However, there is no law in the West that prevents black people from being successful and creating a lifestyle that other people would covet and want. The victim mentality is not exclusive to the black culture, but considering black people make up part of the lower classes in the West, I do see the prevalence of it, and it kind of conforms with the crabs in a bucket analogy, whereby the crabs pull back the other crabs that are trying to escape because they're thinking, if I'm going to go down, you're going down too. And why I say it conforms with that analogy is that by people constantly complaining about the privileges that they don't have in their life makes everyone around them feel the same. So then they essentially give up and lose faith and lose hope and fail to visualize a quality of life that they can aspire towards, which is a quality of life that is enjoyed predominantly by white people. And it makes sense because white people make up the majority of the West. They are the richest countries, they have generational wealth, there's more chance of that. But it's not all white people who get to enjoy that. What about the white people who are told that they're privileged, who grew up in council estates, who don't have inheritance passed down to them, who have parents who might have been addicted to drugs, parents who might have given them away, parents who got involved in crime? I think that it can be very easy to misconstrue reality, and the reality is that the majority of wealthy people in the West will be white because they make up the largest percentage of the population. But that quality of life can still be enjoyed by other ethnicities, and having a victim mentality isn't going to help you to get there, and telling other people to continue complaining about their circumstance isn't going to help either. So the victim mentality has pervaded the black culture, and I think is one of the reasons why we're held back. The truth is, we're always going to have issues around our ethnicity and how other people perceive us, but the only way we're going to change these negative stereotypes about us is by changing it ourselves and doing it by action and not through complaining. The next thing I'm not particularly proud of is how stingy black people can be. It might be something that's just experienced by black people who grow up in the black community, but people can tend to be quite tight-fisted, and I don't see many people being as generous as other ethnicities are. I mean, it's almost a joke about how much someone might owe someone else, about not having to pay for something, but it's not something that I would say that I'm proud of. There might be many reasons why black people can be stingy, but it's not to be conflated with frugality. Frugality is being wise with your money, not being spendthrift, and managing your money well, and being generous at appropriate times. But stinginess has a negative connotation in the sense that there seems to be a lack of justification behind the lack of generosity at times, and that can be existent within a particular family structure as well. If we're looking at a nuclear family, we would imagine that parents would want to make lives somewhat easier for their children, but if you're looking at some of the principles that go into building wealth, preventing your children from having access to whatever financial position that you've put yourself in can be a good thing because it makes them work for it themselves. But there's also a time to be generous. There's a time to be giving. And I think that some aspects of the black community can struggle with doing that. The reasons as to why people might be stingy might be predicated on financial illiteracy. There's a lot of black people who save for decades, not necessarily knowing what to do with the money or the best way to get their money to work for them, which is why they might be stingy, because it takes you longer, rather than using something like compound interest or investing in the stock market or investing in something that's going to give you higher returns over decades rather than just saving it in a current account. Perhaps that's the reason why. And there seems to be a lack of trust around other people, maybe because people get burnt. And again, it's within the same community. People can be financially reckless within the black community, which might explain why people tend to be more tight-fisted, but it's not a positive characteristic, and it's not something that I'm necessarily proud of. And I'd like us to have a reputation of being generous when it comes to being charitable with your money. I'm also not proud of black people's lack of vulnerability. You see that a lot in families. Oftentimes, parents can struggle to be tactile with their children. They can overdo the disciplinarian role over their children. Maybe the relationship with their children is damaged by the lack of tactile interaction. But I've noticed that a lot of black people struggle to open up, both in relationships with their partners, which might stem from the relationships that they have with their parents and their grandparents, but the lack of embrace that children receive seems to run in their intimate relationships later on in life. And I wonder why black people are like this. I wonder why it's become as pervaded as it is in our community. But again, it's not something to necessarily be proud of. People who are afraid of being vulnerable seem to have a distrusting disposition, which can make it harder for them to date. So I've noticed how prominent it is in the black community. I wonder if the lack of vulnerability is rooted in being let down in the past, is rooted in the relationship that was built with your parents, but it's definitely something that I've noticed, and I think it's something, again, that holds a lot of black people back, because we need to be trusting in order to sustain a healthy, sanitary relationship, which is supposed to last for decades and is conducive to the kind of environment that a child needs to grow up in to achieve some kind of success. I think if black people show more vulnerability when it comes to relationships, then they're more likely to sustain longer marriages, which means that they're more likely to raise children who have two parents. They're more likely to have more intimate relationships with their children, which prevents the possibility of estranging or marginalizing their child for being homosexual or not being as they wanted them to be. And it just keeps the family unit more solid. So you might notice that the common denominator between all of these things that I'm not proud of when it comes to being associated with the black culture are things that break down our community and break down our family unit. If we're more tolerant of sexuality, we're more likely to have intimate relationships with the people that are meaningful who are around us, like our partners and our children and our parents. We can build families and generations of families who are tight and closely connected. And when we have a community of families who are tight and intimate and closely connected and generous, who help each other out, we're more likely to build the principles and values that we need to construct generational wealth in the West. So what do I think about how I think the black community needs to improve? It's a frustrating one because it's not something that can be done by any one individual. What needs to happen is enough black people needs to subscribe to the kind of values and principles that build generational wealth. And the perspicuity and wisdom lying behind those values and principles will all be predicated on things that allow for sustainable, meaningful relationships and civility in the community. And since the American Civil Rights Movement, we've been afforded those privileges. And they are privileges because they're not enjoyed by everyone in the world. We can be who we want to be. We can achieve success in the societies that we're living in. And we can do that concertedly. And that's not going to happen if we continue to look to crime for easy success, if we continue to blame other people for the injustice of slavery, if we continue to antagonize the government and other ethnicities for the lack of privileges that we have in society, and if we continue to refrain from being vulnerable, and if we understate the importance of building an inclusive and diverse family, because that's where the world is headed towards. You can't have a diaspora of your own people in another country without accepting the fact that your culture will be influenced characteristically by the culture which predominates the land that you're living on. So if you wanted to know my honest opinion about how I think the black community is going to evolve in the West, well, I think that we're moving forward positively and incrementally towards building the values that we need to create generational wealth. I think individuals are taking it upon themselves rather than blaming other people for what they've been subjected to. Instead, they have learned the values and principles that they need to acquire the lifestyle that they're aspiring towards, because they know that it's attainable and they're not letting anything stop them, because nothing will actually stop them from achieving that within their lives. My concern is about how quickly we'll get there as a community, and the more people that hold on to outdated, anachronistic views about how the family structure should be and how we should interact with our families, then the longer that it's going to take us to actually get there. The West is becoming so diverse because of how many cultures exist within a given metropolitan area. So maybe we won't have a black community or a Latino community or a white community in the future. Maybe we'll just be all mixed race, right? And maybe we'll stop labeling people by their ethnicity. Who knows? But what I do know is that what we know as the black culture today has many negative stereotypes that I would like someday to be extirpated, and the sooner the better. I think black people should take individual responsibility for their drawbacks and shortcomings and disadvantages, and not allow it to be an excuse not to find the quality of life that they know they're capable of finding and living. I think a lot of people who identify as black need to take stock, need to be open to self-deprecation, and need to be understanding that there are many negative stereotypes that they might have been introjected with that they need to get rid of. And I'm one of those, and I'm continuously criticizing myself and my idiosyncrasies and asking myself whether there's aspects of my life that could be improved if I looked at myself and I judged myself objectively, so to speak. But it is difficult, because if you've grown up in a kind of environment where that is normalized, then it can be difficult to get out of those negative habits. I grew up in a working class family with a very strict black father from Nigeria, and a lot of these things that I talk about have stemmed from my family and the people that I've observed around them. I wonder why we haven't built generational wealth. I wonder why certain members of my family are stingy. I wonder why there feels like a lack of community and a lack of family and support when it comes to interacting with one another. And I think that these things can be observed in other black families too. So hopefully addressing these stereotypes will help people to understand why black people might be associated with them, and also for black people to take stock and to consider whether they've been exposed to some of these negative stereotypes too. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this podcast and that it's given you some perspective, and there's more episodes on the way. Until next time.